Gondlo joins us in studio to make sense of the latest results and what they mean for different political parties and the country. Prof, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to your world.
Thanks, Lulu.
It's been a very long week.
Yes, it has. Absolutely.
Your take on the elections, local government elections so far, the results?
Well, Lulu, I think we need to be careful, because the reason why I'm saying we need to be careful is because we need to be patient so that the full picture eventually emerges. At the moment now, yes, we can make inferences, and our comments would tend to be tentative in certain respects. I'm not saying there's nothing to say about the figures that have come out. The figures that have come out do underline very important things. Number one, I've listened to the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, their position that, look, we're doing well, the figures have increased. But the point is, when you disaggregate the figures, look at them per metro, all over the country, you actually begin to see a mixed picture about what is happening. The ANC is actually losing. It has lost Nelson Mandela, and it's neck and neck with the DA in Tshwane and Johannesburg. Yes, it has won Buffalo City, it has won Mangaung, but they have all the reasons to be worried. And I still don't know why they are so defensive. There is every reason to worry about the ANC.
Perhaps just to look further at what the Deputy SG was saying earlier on to our reporter Mzwandile Mbeje, saying that no, the ANC is not in decline. The debate that is constantly happening, and Jackson Mthembu had the same thing yesterday as well, where he was saying, well, if you look at the national figures, for example, we look fine, but when you trickle down, figures, exactly yes, as you said, it's a different picture. Why do you think there's that sense of, well, let's just look at the national figures, considering that this is a local government election?
Yes, it's the tendency of a leadership which is defensive, a leadership which has its back against the wall, gets so defensive, and that's what we are seeing now. The Deputy President of the country and the Deputy President of the ANC made a very important point, that the organization needs to do thorough introspection. And if you are defensive, you can't do thorough introspection.
Now, just as you say, the leadership of the ANC, and Deputy President and the President, sort of saying, listen, we're coming out and we are accepting that more work needs to be done on the ground. An opportunity for the opposition parties to then come into play, and we've seen with the results so far that there's a lot that's happening. Voters have made a choice, they've made a decision. Going forward, what do we take from this local government election?
Well, I see this local government election as some kind of dress rehearsal, some kind of theater, a proxy competition for what is going to happen in 2019. But truly speaking, I don't think the ANC, if it goes in this kind of mode into 2019, would actually perform any better. So that moment of introspection is going to be very important for the African National Congress.
Now, let's shift focus maybe from the ANC overall and look at all the other parties. I mean, you had analysts yesterday also coming out and saying that, you know, you had perhaps three different types of voters this time around. You had people who said, well, we're not happy with the ruling party, so we're going to vote for another party. You had those who said, I simply won't vote at all, that 18.4 million who didn't vote. A very important figure that we need to consider as we analyze these results that are coming in. Now, do you think that 18.4 million that didn't vote played a huge role in what we're seeing in terms of, for example, the DA then gaining support, whereas their people actually went out in numbers and voted, and you've got those who didn't vote and who are possibly ANC supporters?
Tabitha, that's a very important point. It's a very important question. But I must say, we are having a seminar, for instance, at the university, whereby we're going to be looking at data in detail and reflecting on what has happened. Because that particular figure of 18 million needs also to be unpacked so that we understand who actually constitutes that particular figure, what's the majority and why. Because there is a tentative argument that, look, some of them are actually ANC members who decided that, look, we're going to hold back the vote because these guys have not done A, B, C, D. But you can't confirm that. We really need to look into the data, analyze the data, and then be able to disaggregate it properly.
Now, Prof, let's speak about the different metros, the big metros, for instance, Tshwane, Johannesburg, and Ekurhuleni. The results coming in so far, we're looking at Ekurhuleni sitting on about close to 50%, as the DSG mentioned in the clip with Mzwandile, and we're looking at Tshwane, where the results are not pretty clear. We're still waiting for the exact results. Gauteng and Johannesburg neck and neck, DA and ANC, with the EFF sitting at about 11%, 11.55%. Are we likely to see a different picture by tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the evening, when the final results announcements are made?
A different picture in Johannesburg?
Different picture in Johannesburg, a different picture in Ekurhuleni and in Tshwane, where she mentioned that Soshanguve, there's still a huge count that needs to come through, so they can't really speak of figures, mention figures. What exactly are we likely to see tomorrow, looking at the figures presently?
Lulu, I must admit, based on the desktop research that myself and a few other colleagues, professors at UJ, did, our estimation actually was that, look, the African National Congress is going to be beaten by the DA in Nelson Mandela. And I must say, I actually put my head on the block that I think the ANC is going to do well, sit comfortably in Tshwane and Johannesburg. But quite interestingly, the situation is just turning around completely differently. And in the case of Johannesburg, I don't think it's the poor administration of Parkstown. I don't think so. Because if you analyze the administration led by Parkstown, it has actually done well. I would argue that it's done well. But there is this cloud of national politics which always hangs above provincial and worse local government politics. And I'm talking here about the e-tolls and so forth. And these things tend to shift the attitude and choices of the voter the other direction. And I think that's what we're seeing in Johannesburg and Tshwane.
Prof, let's shift focus to the so-called kingmakers now. You saw on that graphic for the city of Johannesburg, the EFF sitting on just over 10%, which is an important percentage when we start talking about coalitions, which they have said they are not in those conversations at this point in time. If we do see coalitions, what do you expect to see in that context?
That's a very difficult one.
It is a difficult one, but let's unpack it based on what the ANC has been saying, that press briefing we saw with Malema earlier on. There's a lot that's coming out, so drips and drabs of information coming out from the political parties. We can also mention some of the other smaller political parties. Could they possibly play a role there, or is the EFF the ones who are ultimately going to say we're going with the ANC or we're going with the DA based on the terms and conditions of that agreement?
Yes. I think the EFF is going to be the ultimate kingmakers.
And they keep denying that. Why don't they want to admit that they are kingmaker in this context?
Yes, especially in Johannesburg and Tshwane, I see the EFF playing a very decisive role. And I actually see the EFF setting the terms of the cooperation. And actually see the big parties conceding to quite a large extent to the terms and conditions that the EFF is going to put. Because I'm telling you, unless the DA, let's say the DA for instance, concedes to quite a reasonable degree to the terms of the EFF, otherwise that coalition is not going to be functional. Remember, the EFF, these are young people, and they have a very clear ideological position. They have a clear vision and a very clear goal, and are committed to it.
Just going back to the press conference that Tabile has mentioned, which took place earlier, that clear and a goal and an ambition that they're working on, Malema mentioned the fact that they're not in a rush. It's only been 3 years, and they don't want to make mistakes that other parties have come and made and then sort of disappear and lose voters. Their mandate is to ensure that their voters get what the services that they need. And they've come out and said, as leaders of EFF, we will give a certain percentage of our own salaries to ensure that the wards that we have won.
Actually, so every month the MPs give a certain percentage of their salaries to the party fund. Well, that's what they say they do.
Yes.
And they're going to use those funds in order to do work in the wards that they've won, which is something we've never really seen
No,
before.
we haven't. So they're coming with a totally new idea. So it sort of seems like the children that walked away from the African National Congress are now bringing ideas that the whole country seems to be shocked to see, and the whole experience. And from just looking at it from the outside, it seems like this is exactly what the country needs.
Yes. What I can say about the EFF, their articulation of a radical ideology is not only rhetoric. It's not rhetoric, because if you could see at the plans and at some of the sacrifices they are making, that's why I'm saying I think the EFF has a very serious long-term plan and goal. And as a result of that, they are not really prepared to just go into any coalition just for the sake of it.
But then, speaking of going into any coalition, it makes a lot of sense what you've just said, because if you look at their policies, for example, compared to the DA's policies, it would be tricky for them to get to a point where they agree. Because Darlene Mpofu yesterday, the chairperson of the EFF, said, when we go into a coalition with a party, we will say, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, our problem in Alex, for example, is X. That party that we've gone into a coalition with needs to agree on that. Otherwise, we're not going to go into those coalitions with that party. So I think we're going to see a clash of policies there. It makes a lot of sense. Their policies are extremely radical. And it's going to be difficult for them to actually sit down and get to a point where they agree. So it makes a lot of sense when you come out and say, that the bigger parties might be the ones who actually
have to concede.
And say, we are going to meet you more than halfway, regardless of whether you have the least percentage or not.
Because, for instance, look at the DA, you see, and the EFF. The EFF is shining a light on an issue which is unresolved ever since South Africa got liberation in 1994, the land question. And the EFF is very firm on the land question, a position which other parties like the PAC have always maintained. So I don't know how, if they come into a coalition, they'll actually deal with the EFF's approach on the land question and the land grabs that we have seen. How does a coalition partner react in a situation like that? So it will be very interesting, actually.
I think we've had a lot of serious talk now. I want to look at something a little bit lighter, and those are the campaigns. A representative from the ACDP spoke about it, saying that he feels the ACDP got less votes, and those votes went to the DA because of their campaign. Their campaign was seemingly stronger. We saw a lot happening. We saw filling up the stadium. There was a competition between the parties about filling up stadiums. We saw many hashtags. I think the EFF had Tela Tuba. We had the ANC. They had Asinavalo. Siangoba. There was a lot of hashtags. We saw a lot of celebrities being used for campaigns, musicians, artists, etc. Now, I found that really interesting, and our social media was used in this election. It was massive. But the one thing that keeps coming out, and we saw this with analysts from our digital department as well as the CSIR, saying social media was the most misleading thing in this election, because parties went in there thinking, we are trending all the time. We have filled up what we have filled up, and that is going to directly translate into votes. But the South African market is not the same. as the US market, for example, where that market, if a celebrity tweets about a certain product, tomorrow it's sold out. The South African market is different. Not all South Africans are even on social media, for example. And we've had this debate a lot in the run-up to the elections. Let's go through that rhetoric of parties, political parties, not just the ANC, not just the EFF, the DA as well. A lot of the political parties use social media this time around. Them thinking that the filling up the stadiums and also their presence on social media was going to translate into those votes. Let's take a look at that.
Tabil, I'm not sure whether you would agree with me, because I call that competition for symbols. Yes, it's competition on the terrain of symbolism. Because it's not only competition about filling the stadiums. You saw the competition also to have access to former President Thabo Mbeki.
Yes.
Yes, the EFF led that kind of symbolic gesture, you see. And a number of symbols, actually, these guys have been competing about. The name of Nelson Mandela, for instance. Yes, of course, the tweets and social media. I see that as part of symbolism. The competition over symbols, which I think small parties need to look at it carefully as they plan their pre-election programs, which symbols they are going to emphasize. ACDP also needs to be quite emphatic on its choice of symbols and what messages it builds alongside those symbols, rather than complaining about the DA SMS. I don't think it really helps.
Sorry, Prof, just to come in there, is it not an issue of finances?
Yes, Lulu, I would agree with you. There is an element about the finances, but at the same time, an innovative person can use a very simple symbol and actually expound a very good message out of that, you see.
Prof, we'll have to leave it there for now. This was such an interesting discussion that we're going through.
There's so much.
There's so much to
happening.
discuss, and we will be taking you through some of those results as we continue with the show. That was Professor Gwandiwe Gondlo joining us live in the studio as South Africa prepares to see how best political parties will work out a possible solution